What's up creators, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be very simple and very basic. I'm going to talk to you about filters. Now, not to be confused with presets and LUTs, all the filters that we apply in post-edition. Today we're talking about physical filters that we use on field to correct our image or to enhance with some type of effects. Now this video comes along because, well, one of you guys asked me about the diffusion filter and what it was in a previous video. So today I'm going to explain that diffusion filter plus all the other common filters that we find to use in photography and video. So let's jump into it. First of all, we're going to cover the utility or correction filters, and then we're going to go into the effect. Now, when it comes to correction or utility filters, I think the most important one out of all of them, the one that has the most impact, is the ND filter that we have right here. This is a variable ND, and over here, coincidentally, I have it as well, just the same, exactly the same filter. Now, this filter is created mainly for video, so it's essential for video makers, but it's also a good perk to have for as a photographer. Now, the main purpose of a neutral density filter is to control the exposure on your video and in your photography. So you all know that in order to take good quality video that looks natural, you need to obey the shutter angle rule. Now, the shutter angle rule, what it is basically saying that you need to have the double shutter speed to the frame rate that you're shooting at. So right now, for example, I'm shooting at 24 frames per second. My shutter speed is 1/50. So that's the double, and therefore we have natural motion blur in our image. So if I move my hand right here, we can see that there's some natural blur, very similar to what we see with our own eyes. Now, what happens when I alter these values and don't accept the rule? So let's say that maybe I go down with the shutter speed. If I go down with the shutter speed, notice how everything is very blurry and very choppy because, well, there's very little frames in our image per second, so everything looks horrible. So this isn't what we want to do. Now, what happens if we go to the other extreme? So right now I'm 1/500 of a second, and as you can see, it looks very unnatural, very digital, very sharp. Why? Because we have 500 frames in each and every second of this video. So it's looking very digital, and this isn't what we're accustomed to seeing with our very own eyes, and therefore it kind of looks a bit jerky. So let's pull it down once again to our normal shutter speed. So there we have it. We have our shutter angle at 180 once again. So you may be asking yourself, what does this have to do with ND filters? Now, let's say that you're shooting outside in midday and it's very bright and you're trying to shoot in the right shutter angle, but also you're trying to shoot wide open in your aperture, maybe 1.4, maybe 2.0 or 2.8 aperture, and your image is blown out. You have overexposed parts where you're losing a lot of information. There's where you need to apply an ND filter to compensate and correct the exposure. So a very easy way to explain ND filters is to think of them as sunglasses when you're at the beach. When you go at the beach, you're basically closing your eyes because there's so much brightness, and where you apply yourself with some sunglasses like this ND filter, you can see that everything is a bit more controlled, a bit more dark, and this one is a variable ND filter, so you can make it dark or make it brighter. Now, in this way, you can control the highlights on your image when you're shooting at bright shutter speeds and you're respecting the shutter angle. So this is the best way that you can compensate your exposure and have a correct image where there's no loss of information. So that's the primary function of an ND filter, and it is for video. But also for photography, you can use it to create long exposures because, well, something similar occurs. When you're shooting a long exposure, you're keeping your shutter open for a very long time. Therefore, a lot of light is going into the sensor, and you need to compensate all that light in order to have a correct image. So there you can slap on an ND filter, and then you can take all the long exposures that you want. Now, the second utility filter that I want you to look at, and it's a great thing to have in your arsenal, is what we have right here, which is basically just a piece of glass without any coloring, without any texture, and it is the UV filter. Now, in modern days, in digital sensor cameras, UV filters are basically used as protection for the glass elements in your lens. So if you're shooting in a wet day, maybe you're shooting in a dusty situation, or maybe you're in the side of a motorbike track taking some photographs on some sport photography, and you don't want any dust or any gravel or any particles going into your lens, the UV filter is a great way you can protect your equipment, which is very expensive, and you don't get any scratches on your lens. Now, in previous years, in film cameras and analog cameras, you used an ND filter to avoid any UV rays going into your film and ruining your photograph. So in the past, it had more of an important function. Today, we use it to protect our equipment. Now, the third utility filter that is very nice to have in your arsenal is what we have right here, which is a circular polarizer, or a CPL. Now, polarizers are great filters for landscape photographers, but also for filmmaking. So this thing, what it's doing is cutting out reflections and any type of glare in your image. You'll probably notice it a lot in TV shows or in movies where there are two people talking inside a car when they're driving around, but the camera is outside of the windshield or the window just looking in. Now, in normal situations, you wouldn't be able to see the subjects because of all the glares and all the reflections in the windshield. Now, when you use a polarizing filter, you can cut all those reflections out so you can look inside without anything obstructing your view towards the subject. So that's a great way you can use a polarizing filter. It also works with windows. It also works with water to look on beneath a creek, for example, or beneath a wave. It's a great way to use that. And also photographers like to use them for landscape photography because it cuts out all the glare in the clouds and also in any type of greens. And as a consequence to that, we have a more of a vivid with richer blues, richer greens, and a bit more contrast. So the polarizing filter is a great tool to have. It's not a must-have, but it is a great tool to have for those specific situations. So for me, these three utility filters are a must-have, but there are also some honorable mentions. So for example, right here, we have this light pollution filter, which is great if you're into astrophotography. A lot of times when you're shooting astro and you're remotely close to a city, you can see the light leaking into your astrophotography of the city, and sometimes it has a yellow or reddish cast, and with these types of filters you can get rid of that light pollution from the cities or for any cloud passing by or anything like that. So that's a very specific filter for a very specific niche in photography. Then, for example, we have these ones, which are color correction filters, and these ones are created to compensate any aberration on the rendering of colors from your lens or from your sensor. So let's say that you have a lens, a vintage lens that projects a green cast into your image or a purple cast. You can use one of these filters to compensate the white balance and basically just correct your image. Okay, now into the fun stuff. Let's go into filters that create effects on field. Now, right now, if you're looking at this image, you can notice that it's a bit stylized, a bit more than usual if you're regular in this channel. That's because right now I have a mist snow filter with a 1/4 of intensity. This is a diffusion filter. Now you can look at the before and afters. If I just pull it out, this is with, notice the lights in the background, notice my skin. And if I pull it out, notice how the image is a lot more sharp and we don't have all that haze and glowing effect around the lights and around my skin. This is because I'm using a diffusion filter. This is a mist filter from Freewell. Now on screen right now we have a legendary one that everyone has heard of, the Black Pro Mist from Tiffin. Now you can buy it in 1/4 of strength, which is what I have in my filter right here. You can buy it 1/8 all the way down to 5. Now if you go all the way down to 3, you can notice the effect that is very harsh. Now this filter, in essence what it is basically a piece of glass with a lot of grain in it. Now the grain in it will create some diffraction in the light coming into your sensor, creating a softer image, but also blooming out all the highlights and creating this halation effect. Now, if you pay attention, let me just put it back on. If you pay attention to the highlights, notice how we create this mist effect around the light. Notice how everything turns into this misty effect, and that's why it's called the mist effect right now. As you can see, everything has this glowing effect, and that's basically a byproduct of the diffraction that is occurring in this filter. So the diffusion filter, what it's trying to do is replicate the look from vintage old-fashioned lenses that didn't have the sharpest edges or the sharpest image quality, and try to replicate those effects and those aberrations in modern photography. Now for video, it's a great tool to make it a bit more cinematic, a bit more dreamy, and for photography, I particularly like to use it in portrait photography for female models. Why? Because the softness that it creates just erases a bit of the imperfections in the skin, and also if the light is hitting directly the model, you can get that glowing effect in the skin, which is very appealing to some models. So it's a great tool to have and to try out. Maybe you can use it in your photography and in your video work, or maybe, well, you don't like it and you like to skip it. Now the second and last effect filter that I'm going to show you, because I don't want this video to be too long, is going to be the streak filters. Now streak filters, as you can notice, they have this very noticeable horizontal lines on the glass, and what it's creating or trying to replicate is the anamorphic glares that we can see in high-end anamorphic lenses. And obviously we have the blue streak filters that create these blue or aqua lines, and then we have the golden, which creates yellow lines. Now it's not replicating the anamorphic lens, because anamorphic lenses are squeezing the image so you get a wider aspect ratio. In this case, it's just replicating the glares that you can get with these lenses as a byproduct. Now right now I don't have one of these to show you in detail, but as you can see from the example images here in Moment, the effects are quite nice. You can use it in some street photography or some urban photography with a car photography, and it would look fantastic. So there you have it, guys, just a quick recap on filters that you can apply into your photography and into your video, maybe to correct your image or to spice things up. I hope you achieved some knowledge out of this. If you did, give it a like, subscribe, all those things. I'm Tony Fuentes. Cheers to all of you, and I'll see you in the next one.